Tom here in Adventure. Thank you for tuning into my channel. This is a North Face VE25, one of the world's most widely used expedition tents. I've had 3 of these tents over a period of 25 years, and it has some incredible strengths and good aspects to the tent, but it also equally has a number of weaknesses. So would I buy a 4th? Stay tuned to find out. So before I go any further, this video is just regarding my experience of this tent. I've had North Face VE25s for over 25 years now. This is the 3rd model that I've actually had. I've also used a number of other tents from Terra Nova Equipment, for example their Mountain Hyperspace. From Mountain Hardware, I've used 2 Triangle 2s. I've used Helibird tents and matches and solos, so I have quite a reasonable experience of a number of other different brands of tents as well as this one. The video this afternoon, I'm afraid, is shot from my garden just due to travel restrictions, and also the garden here is actually AstroTurf, so hence the weights and not the actual pegs out on the tent itself. The North Face state that the VE25 is one of their Summit Series tents used for extreme conditions and tested by their athletes. So it's undoubtedly a 4-season tent. But to be fair, there are a number of aspects about this tent that I think are absolutely special and really, really good. And I also think there are a few areas, I suppose, that are okay. And of course, there are a few areas that I think are weaknesses. Okay, so talking about some of the amazing features of this tent. The tent is very, very versatile in my opinion, and incredibly comfortable. There's absolutely fantastic attention to detail. You know, so for example, you have lots of pockets in the tent, 4 sort of at ground level and 2 in the roof. You have really, really good ventilation, both inside the tent and actually out. You can lie either across the tent or straight up and down in the tent, and 3 people can do that. You know, there is actual space for that. Okay, so I've mentioned before that the space in the inside of this tent is really, really good. At the moment, I'm actually sitting pretty much in one of the 4 corners, and my head's not really pushed, you know, right against the roof, and I would be sort of 6'1". So the accommodation and space and volume and usability, you know, so for those tent-bound days, if you're in a tent for a long period of time, you know, there's 4 people can sit in here, and I have done this in the past. I've had 4 people sitting in a tent, playing cards, you know, chatting. There's loads of space, you know, to do that. So the other good features are, you know, the inner here, the way that the tent is actually cut. This cantinery cut, or I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right, but the cut of the actual ground sheet on the tent, and the way that it's set up, you know, there's really, really good tension on the inner, and that just reduces the inner flapping around in the wind. So under high winds, the tent really will more kind of like just vibrate and shake in the wind, as opposed to actually, you know, flapping in the wind. And like I mentioned earlier, there's really, really good ventilation, you know, in the roof, with zippers and panels up here, and they go right through, you know, to the outer tent. And with the cut of the fly sheet itself, and that it doesn't come right down to the ground, you've also got really, really good ventilation there, although it exposes the tent and the inner of the tent, you know, to splashback, spindrift and draft, so that's a bit of a disadvantage. So some of the aspects about a tent that I think are okay, but actually could be a little bit better. The ground sheet fabric is a 70 denier, and that's really just the thickness of the fabric, or the thickness of the individual fibres. In my opinion, for an expedition tent, I would definitely prefer 100 denier. Because once, or if your ground sheet gets punctured, you know, it really is part of your tent, and yeah, it can't be repaired by a patch, but it's just never going to be the same. And certainly, if I had invested the money in the tent, I wouldn't want, you know, a hole in my ground sheet. Not that I've ever really had any issues, to be fair, but I just sort of feel that on an expedition tent, I would like a slightly heavier ground sheet. Now the canopy here on the inner tent, this is a 40 denier fabric, which is absolutely fine, and so is the fly sheet. It's also 40 denier fabric. Now it's a 40 denier silicone PU combination. Now I feel that this is a step backwards for North Face, because the 2 previous versions of the VE25 actually had silicone on both sides of the fly sheet, and in the industry that is widely regarded as being definitely stronger, but obviously a little bit more expensive. So from the North Face's point of view, I feel that while they will have reasons for doing this, I feel that if the strength of the fly sheet is reduced, it then just reduces the overall potential performance of the tent itself. And I certainly feel that their main reasons for doing it, would actually be cost cutting. But in saying that, there's also good reinforcements on the fly sheet fabric at critical points, so I suppose they've kind of compensated in some ways for that too. So this tent has amazing performance under snow load. I've actually been out in the previous version of this with exactly the same pole structure, and the snow has actually been almost up to the roof, and the tent has handled the snow load really, really well. The side walls and the rear of the tent are, I suppose, they're not exceptionally aerodynamic. If they're too aerodynamic, they're then a lot flatter, and then you get a massive build-up and weight of snow on them. Whereas if it's a slightly more vertical side wall, there's less weight of snow actually on the tent. So certainly for snow load, I mean, this tent is absolutely fantastic. Now, the poles of this tent are DAC poles, which are really, really good poles, but they are only 9mm. And certainly in my opinion, for a tent such as this, with this amount of actual volume in it, the poles should definitely be 10mm. Now that is adding a bit more to the weight, of course, but at the end of the day it is an expedition tent. It's designed for 4-season use, and you are going to have a weight penalty. I think that strength should be an absolute priority. So now I'm going to actually talk about the main drawback that I have with this tent. I mean, I've talked about a few other issues, but this is the main one, and that is performance in high wind. Now, when I say high wind, what I would mean would be winds in excess of 50 miles per hour. So I've had all of my VE25s out in high winds, and quite frequently the whole system here, the poles will actually do what I would call invert. So if the pole is just here, the poles will actually collapse in, and usually they do spring back out again. But once the wind gets over 50 miles per hour, I sort of feel that the tent starts to struggle. Now, if you can get the tent shelter, I mean, ideally you'll always do that, but on an expedition tent, there are some times when you just don't have the shelter. So once the wind gets over 50 miles an hour, you can have a look in these actual next few videos, and you'll see this, but my estimations here are definitely no more than 50 miles per hour, and the tent, is certainly under a fair amount of pressure. Now, looking at the back of the tent, because the tent is actually so broad, it just offers a very, very high wind profile, and there's a lot of fabric and not that many poles. There are quite large panels, so the whole tent occupies a tremendous volume, but with not that many poles to actually support that volume. Alright, just to conclude about this tent and wrap this up sort of for today. So the aspects of the tent, first of all, that I really, really love would be the practicality of the tent, the design in respect of the fact that you can lie across it and lie lengthwise in it, the general overall volume in the tent, the height, it's just about right to give you that amount of space. I think it has fantastic performance in snow load, the attention to detail, as well as the comfort features on the inside. So for example, 4 big pockets along the floor, 2 pockets in the roof, multiple gear and hanging out loops. Other little features that I like, would be the valances just at the front of the tent and the back of the tent, that you can put snow or stones on just to secure the tent that little bit more. I think the fabrics are pretty okay, and I like the reinforcement and the design, the way that it's made to make it actually stronger on the critical stress points. I like the cut of the inner tent. It's cut just so there's really good tension on the inner tent, and that adds to the structural strength, and it also reduces the tent flapping in the wind. The tent actually vibrates, a little bit more in the wind. So those, I suppose, really would be the key things that I like about the tent. And I also must mention that I personally love the look of the tent, if that counts for anything. I think it's one of the best looking tents in the world. I mean, I really, really, really like the look of it. The average things on a tent, would be the fabrics themselves, you know, the ground sheet, the canopy. The canopy is actually okay, but the fly sheet fabric I do think is a little bit average. But if it's well constructed and well designed, with critical stress points reinforced, then that probably counteracts for that. So really just the one area of criticism that I have for this tent is its performance in high winds. And when I say high winds, that would be winds in excess of 50 miles per hour. The tent is very, very difficult to set up in those conditions, and obviously difficult to take down without sustaining damage. I have had a number of bent poles on this tent, and they have been from setting the tent up or taking it down in high winds. I contacted North Face regarding this in order to get the poles repaired, and they actually said that they didn't have any. So I must admit I was very, very, very disappointed in that. Now, I think any tent that pitches inner first, and any tent that has a fairly large volume with, I wouldn't say minimal number of poles to support that volume, is vulnerable. But with 4 poles and with 4 9mm poles supporting the main volume of this tent, it's very, very difficult to manage, even with 2 people, you know, setting up in high winds. And then even when this tent is set up in high winds, it's just an amazing tent in some respects, but just not a great wind tent. So if you were thinking of purchasing one of these and you knew you were going to be out like in really, really, really high winds, I think there are other options, you know, which would be better. So that's really about it. Thank you for watching. I hope you've liked the video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, you know, or the like. If you don't like, instead of just clicking the don't like button, you know, let's try and be fair and give me a reason maybe as to why you don't like it, and I'll try and get back to you. So that's really about it. If you subscribe to the channel, I mean, that would be great as well. I'll be doing lots of more content, you know, like this, real world kind of discussions of my experiences with different products. So thank you very much for watching Tom Hinney Adventure.